Today we're going to be talking about something in geography known as a population pyramid. And as you will see, it's a model that takes a look at and helps us analyze a population and its breakdown, and oftentimes it looks like a pyramid, so that's where we get the name from. So please follow along, and you're going to be asked to break down these pyramids on your own, and I'm going to walk you through some examples today. So please make sure you are paying attention as I go through this. When I'm asking you to break these down, I'm going to have you do it similarly to our 4 levels of analysis that we've done for maps, but now you're just going to substitute pyramid for map. But essentially, 4 levels can be used for any sort of visual expression, whether it's a map, a graph, a chart, a population pyramid like we're seeing here. It doesn't just have to be for a map. So again, I'm going to walk you through an example using the 4 levels of analysis, and I'm going to be clicking off of the slideshow here and there. So please, again, follow along so that when you're asked to do this later, you will know what to do. So first off, before we get to breaking down a population pyramid, let's talk a little about what it's going to show you. Every population pyramid will have a similar look to this. Population pyramid breaks a country's population down by 2 factors, basically. One being age brackets, and you can see that they're broken down into 5-year age increments, starting with 0 to 4, and going all the way up to 80 plus in this case. Sometimes you'll see them higher, but they generally look like this. It's also generally looking at male versus female population in a country. How many males to female will we see? And a couple things we want to recognize about this is that in most societies, in almost all examples you're going to see, there are going to be more young males than females. But as you move up the population pyramid, as populations get older, at about 40 to 45, it'll flip, and there'll be more females than males in the population. And this is reminiscent of the fact that women tend to live longer than men. And there could be a lot of reasons why that is, but that is generally the case you will see as we go along in these different pyramids today. So please follow along as I go through this. And like I said, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between an example, 4 levels of analysis, and this slideshow. So here we have a basic population pyramid showing the country of Niger in the year 2020. Niger has a population of just over 24 million people. And when we're looking at the 4 levels of analysis, the first thing we always look at is the basic information. What is this pyramid of? What is the pyramid showing? When does this pyramid take place? And what is the scale? All right. Well, the pyramid is of the age and sex breakdown of Niger's population. Okay, it's very simple. Where is this pyramid showing? It's showing Niger. When does this pyramid take place? This pyramid takes place in 2020, right? Now we could look at other years for the country of Niger, and I'm going to show you a website in a little bit that you can look at different years of the same country. But we're looking for the year 2020 for the country of Niger. And now you're asking, how can we determine scale? Well, remember, scale is not just distance on the map. Scale is also the level of zoomed in that we can see. And in this case, we're looking at the country breakdown, right? We're not looking at an individual city or a sub-region of the country of Niger. We're looking at the entire country. So the scale of this is the country. Now, if we wanted to look at a particular city in Niger or a subregion, we could do that probably, but for our purposes today, we're just looking at the country. All right, so that's our first level, very basic. And we don't need to go much deeper than that. We just want to get a basic idea of what's going on. All right, coming back to our pyramid. Our second level of analysis, look for patterns. Now, this is different than when we're looking at a map. We're not looking at, say, clusters of dots or different colors all over the map. We're looking at differences in age groups and what might stand out as being unique in a country like Niger, for example. And so when I look at this map, one of the patterns or one of the things that really stands out to me is these bottom three age groups from 0 to approximately 14 years old. Those are pretty big compared to the rest of the country. All right. So one thing that really stands out to me and one pattern that stands out to me is that the lowest three age groups are very large. And so I'm going to go over to my 4 levels of analysis form, and I'm going to say ages 0 to 14 are the largest groups in the country's population. Okay, that's one pattern that sticks out to me. Going back to my presentation here, I also look at this from 40 and up, and it's pretty vertical. It's each of those age groups is pretty small in comparison to the age groups below it. They're a much smaller percentage of the population. So I'm going to notice that as well. So let's say from 40 and up are a much smaller portion of the population. I'm also going to say it drops off dramatically from younger ages. Okay, so those are two things that stand out to me on that particular population pyramid. So just for simplicity, I'm going to leave it there. But I do see these two very unique patterns going on. So now, if I look at my level 3 analysis, my level 3 analysis, I have to explain why is that pattern there? Why do I see these two things? All right, so remember with level 3, you're going to need to go and do some research. And I'm going to have you look at the same 2 websites you should have looked at for the Asia map assignment. You're going to look at the CIA World Factbook, and you're going to look at the Population Reference Bureau, because they will give us a lot of information. Now, what I really notice about this is if I look down here, there's a really big drop off from 9.7 for women to 8.1 at the next age group. And it's hard to see here. That's around 10% for males and drops all the way to 8.3%. Now that's a pretty big drop. You typically see a small drop at this age group, but it's not usually that much. So that tells me there's something going on in Niger. Why would this be such a significant drop off from the lowest age group to the next lowest age group? Something's going on there. So I'm going to go over to my Population Reference Bureau, and I'm going to look at the country of Niger. And for those of you not sure, the country of Niger is right here. All right. Numbers are going to be a little bit different on this website. There's the country of Niger. All right. And I'm going to go and I'm going to look at some of these other statistics. All right. I'm going to look at, fertility. All right. The country of Niger has a really high fertility rate, right? 7 babies per woman in her lifetime. That's a lot of babies being born. So that helps me understand why in this population pyramid we have so many young people, right? A lot of babies are being born, all right? But why so many babies being born? That's an interesting question. What's going on there? Why so many? And that's going to help us understand something else. And I'm going to look at infant mortality. Coming back here to Niger. Niger has 47 infants, so children under 1, that die out of 1,000 before they reach the age of 1. So that's not as high as some of their neighbors. That's still pretty significant. That's a very high infant mortality rate. And so the reason you have a high fertility rate is because a lot of babies are dying before they reach the age of 1, and therefore women have more children, which in turn leads to greater numbers in our population pyramid like we see here. So let's write that down. All right. Why is this pattern there? Well, one of them is because high infant mortality leads to parents having more children for replacement, which leads to more young people in the population. All right. So high infant mortality leads to parents having more children for replacement, which leads to more young people in the population. So we can explain this, right? A lot of babies being born because a lot of babies are dying. And you can see all those babies dying in the fact that there's this big drop here, right? This is a pretty big drop. You don't typically see drops that big, right? So this is all the result of infant mortality and child mortality in the country of Niger. Now, why is it that it gets so narrow up here at the top? Okay, well, people aren't living to be a long age, right? They have what we call a low life expectancy. Low life expectancy. And if we go to our population reference bureau, we can see that our life expectancy, let's just take females for example. Females in Niger will only live to about 63. That's pretty young, right? If you look at some of the countries of Europe, 85 in France, or the United States, which is 81. What about males? Life expectancy at birth for males is a little bit lower, right? That's still really low compared to the rest of the world. And so you have a very low life expectancy. And so you don't have very many people living to these older age groups, right? They are such a significantly less part of the population, right? So a couple of the big things that stand out: wide base, because there's a lot of children being born. Narrow at the top, people aren't living that long. Life expectancy is relatively low compared to the rest of the world. So that now asks the question, well, why might this be? Okay, why is it that we have such a high infant mortality and such a low life expectancy? Okay, well, that's where we might want to go to the CIA World Factbook. And let's go to the country of Niger. Okay, so let's look at the country of Niger. You can look at their people and society. You can look at their government, their economy. I'm going to look at their economy, and let's just find out. They're a landlocked country. They are very resource heavy. Okay, their GDP, not a very big GDP. So that suggests they're not a very highly developed country. Their GDP per capita is about $1,200 as of 2017. So that's on average that the average person produces about $1,200 worth of stuff. So their income is not very high. All right. You can see that most of their population works in agriculture. So they're a subsistence farming community economy. So these people and this country is not very wealthy. They're not very well developed. So that's part of our understanding of this pyramid. So why is this happening? Very low developed economy. Low income population. And if you think about even in places like the United States where people are low income, they usually have less access to the things that would help them live longer, to survive, right? So if you have low development, low income, less means to acquire food, medicine, housing, etc. And if you can't get enough food for yourself, or you can't access medical care or medicine, or you have difficulty putting a solid roof over your head, it's going to be harder for you to survive, right? Parents aren't going to be able to pay for their children to get medical care, right? Or vaccines. And so you have people that are not as healthy as they could be. They're doing more stressful, more arduous work, and therefore it leads to earlier death. Or it also might lead to diseases killing them that otherwise may not happen in other more developed countries. So we have to think about these things as we go along. So what does this mean for the future, right? This is our level 4 question. What does this mean for the future? So what? Okay. Well, let's go back to our Population Reference Bureau and something else we could look at. Percent of the population under the age of 15. Niger, half their population is under the age of 15. Okay, so you have to be able to provide all of those young people with food and water and housing and medicine. They're not working, right? They're under the age where people typically work, right? So how do you provide for all of them, right? So what's the impact of this? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this just for space purposes. A country like Niger, which is very poor, has to support a lot of people that aren't working. It's very, very difficult. Okay, so it strains resources, providing for less productive members of economy. In this case, the young. Right? That's an impact. Okay. When those children get older, right, that economy may have trouble providing jobs for all of them. All right. As they get older, if they're not able to find jobs or jobs that pay them enough, they may seek to move outside of the country. So they may look to find income/jobs outside of Niger. So if this were to happen, right, you have these young people that are looking for jobs, they may leave the country, right? They call this a brain drain, right? You might experience that. You also, in countries where there are less economic opportunities for younger people, they may look to other means to achieve their goals. Maybe it's crime, or they may be brought into some sort of terrorist organization because they are disillusioned with their situation in life, right? So in the future, one of the possible negatives that might come of this is increased crime or radicalization of these youth who maybe have not as much opportunity as they would like. So those are some potential impacts down the road of having such a large youth population. Also, you don't have as many older people who are as knowledgeable in providing for them, right? So without as many older people, you lack governmental experience to solve these problems. And so that could also be a negative. And there's others that we could talk about, and we'll talk about as we look at some other countries. But this is the type of analysis I'm going to expect you to look at, right? You're starting with your level 1 and moving down to 2 and then 3 and then 4, right? So that's just one country, right? And we could look at other countries, and I'm not going to go through this again, but I want to show you some other types of population pyramids and discuss some things you might want to look for as you're looking for your own examples. So let's take a look at a country that's been in the news a lot lately, right? Italy, here's its population pyramid right now. It's an upside down pyramid, right? And you see that this really stands out. This older group, starting at about 45, and then above that, is significantly larger than the groups below it. And each group below it seems to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so this points to a situation where, starting about 70 years ago, and if you think about what happened 70 years ago, it's just after World War II. And there was a great baby boom, and there were a lot of children born in many countries around the world. But after that period, people start having fewer and fewer and fewer children. And you can see that, right? And so now you have a large older group, and their children and grandchildren are much smaller subgroups within the country of Italy. And now you're asking a smaller and smaller group of young people who are in this working age to have to support a larger and larger older group that's retiring, that are more expensive because of medical costs and things like that. And you're putting a lot of strain on your younger generations, which keep getting smaller and smaller. And countries like Italy, you have to think about, well, why are they having fewer children, right? What could be the reason why they're having fewer and fewer children? You're going to have to research that, and you're going to find that out. What's possibly going on here? Why Italy and other countries of Europe, as you'll see, are just not having as many kids. And even here in the United States, we're not having as many kids as we were, right? So why might that be? Right, here's an example of the United States. Here's some things that stand out for me, right? You have a bigger group here. This is what's known as the baby boom generation, the group right after World War II, just like in Italy. And you'll see there's another little bulge right here. This is the children of that baby boom, right? You had a big group that had another big group of kids. But you can see after that, the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the question is, why here, even in the United States, are we seeing such small numbers of children being born, right? What is the cause of this? We're going to have to break this down and see what the heck is going on. I can tell you that the United States has been experiencing fertility loss and decline for several years. It's been going down. So you want to look maybe into things like fertility and infant mortality as a means to try to understand what's happening. You might come across some population pyramids like this, and you look at this and you're like, what the heck is going on here? Well, a country of Qatar, which is in the Middle East, near Saudi Arabia, it's a very wealthy, rich, oil-dependent economy. And one thing you'll say is, well, maybe they really just like having boys, and they just, 30, 40 years ago, they just had a lot of boys. Well, that you could think that, but that would seem like that would just continue forever and ever. And you can see that in the younger ages, they're still relatively similar, right? There's not a big difference here. So what's happening starting in the early 20s and moving up into the 40s and almost into the 50s? Why is there such a big difference? Well, in looking at this age group here, right, this is what they call the prime working age, right? Between 20 and 50, this is when people are in their prime working age, and predominantly men. We think, well, what industries are predominantly men? Well, things like construction and agricultural labor and things like that are what are big for men those ages. And so what happened is Qatar, being a very small country, naturally, population-wise, needed more workers, needed more construction workers, needed more engineers and things like that. And they weren't big enough, and their population wasn't large enough to have enough males. And so what they've done is they've gotten migrant workers from other countries, predominantly men, who have come and work in construction. They've come and work as engineers. They've come and work in hospitality, things like hotels and conventions and things like that. And so you've had this explosion of migrant labor from other countries like India and Pakistan and Nepal, Bangladesh. They've come to countries like Qatar to work, and they're predominantly males. And so that's why you have such a huge skewing of the population pyramid. If you took away all those migrant workers, it would look very similar on the male side as it does on the female side. The female side represents pretty much all natural population, whereas the male side includes a lot of migration in that as well. You look at a country like China, and what's really interesting about population pyramids is you can see historical events and their impact in the population pyramid. And one thing you've probably maybe heard about in the past that's very evident here in the pyramid is China's one-child policy. And China started its one-child policy in 1980. And so you can see right about this time, except for this slight little jump in the 30 to 40 range, and this age group is a result of this large age group having children for the first time. But after that, you can really see the effects of the one-child policy, and you can see that the number of younger people is much smaller than older generations. And what's really interesting about this is that China's one-child policy was very, very impactful in terms of fertility. Fertility rate fell dramatically to less than 2. Birth rates fell dramatically. Just fewer and fewer children were being born. And now you have a much older population that's going to be supported by smaller and younger populations, right? So how are they going to be able to support that older population with fewer and fewer young people coming up? But there's also something else you can see here, which is a very negative experience China's had as a result of the one-child policy. If you look at the younger age groups, you can see there's a significant difference between males and females at these younger groups. And you look at this and you say 3.1 to 2.7, that doesn't seem that much. But if you look at many countries, it's not usually that drastic. It might be a 0.1 or 0.2, but to be 0.4, 0.5 difference between males and females, that's pretty significant. And what they found is that in China, where having a boy is very, very important to the culture, both to continue on the family name, but also to act as a safety net for older and older parents, you got to have a boy. Well, what they found is that parents would find out if they were having a boy or a girl. And if it was a girl, oftentimes they could be aborted or they would be abandoned, and they would try again looking to have a boy. And so you had a lot of young baby girls were either not born or were killed, and therefore you had a big difference in the number of males to females in the younger generations. And this has created problems in the last decade leading up to today, because there are a significantly larger number of males at marrying age than there are females. And so there are many males who are having trouble finding females. And this has led to issues beyond just marriage. You're seeing more forced marriages. You're seeing increased exploitation of women. You're seeing human trafficking, um, brides for sale who are being trafficked or abused or kidnapped because there are not enough females to meet demand, essentially, as they would, if you want to think about it in that term. And so there's been a very negative consequence of the one-child policy, particularly towards women. Right? So that's an impact, right? An unforeseen impact. And that's something we want to be able to try to research and look up, all right, as we go through our own examples. Another example, something you might see, I look at this one of Cambodia, and clearly what stands out for me is this age group right here, the group in 40 to 44. All right, and so I look at that, I think, all right, what's going on here? All the other, ages look pretty similar, right? I mean, they're not exactly what we'd expect, but that one really stands out. What the heck is going on here? So one thing I want you to think about as you're doing your research, you might have to go out and look beyond just those websites. So for example, if I were to type in Cambodia 1975, oh, that stands out, the Cambodian genocide. Okay, I could look at that. I don't want to go to Wikipedia necessarily, but let me go to this, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Let's go there. What's going on in Cambodia? All right, in Cambodia, from April 17, 1975 to January 7, 1979, the Khmer Rouge perpetrated one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century. Nearly 2 million people died under the rule of fanatical communist movement. Okay, well, that seems to have an answer to this question. What is going on here? So the Khmer Rouge killed opponents. Millions of people that were opposed to their rule were murdered, right? Essentially, there was a genocide of people that opposed the communist government. And people that maybe weren't killed maybe left the country and didn't return. And so it would make sense that 45 years ago, when this would have started, there would be significantly less people in the country of that age, right? That they either were killed, not killed, they're people that would have been parents were killed, and those who remained were not a significant number of people to have a large number of children. Or maybe they were afraid of bringing children into that situation in Cambodia during that period of time. And so there are just fewer children that were born at that time, right? And you can see that once the Khmer Rouge regime ended in 1979, you can see that immediately there was a population explosion, right? More and more people were born immediately following and in the generations that came after, right? So they have a really young population in the country of Cambodia compared to the older population, right? The older population is significantly smaller. And one thing I think you can really notice is the impact of the Khmer Rouge during this time, right? And if you look at the women to men ratio, there are significantly more women in each age group going up, right? Again, 0.3 or 0.4, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's significant when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, right? I mean, you look here at 60 to 64, there's a pretty big difference there, right? And I think that can be explained, that's 20 years older than this group, right? So these people were about 20 years old at the time that this took place. And so at that time, who do you think were doing most of the fighting? Men. Men would have been fighting. And so a pretty significant number of people were killed in their 20s that were males, and that has led to this big difference in the female to male ratio at this time, right? So those are things we want to be looking for in our population pyramids. And lastly, I want to show you the country of Russia. Russia is interesting, right? Because you have almost every generation, particularly looking at the older generations, a significantly higher number of females to males. And this is interesting, particularly as you get to these older groups up here, right? Look at 80 and above, right? Maybe even 75 and above. That's a significantly higher number of people in the female age group, right? And I think what we can look at here is the result of a couple things, right? The aftermath of World War II And as you can see, there are a far greater number of women in these really old groups, right? Men would be the predominant fighters during World War II, and there's not very many in the population left. After that, you had the Cold War, and you had, conscription into the military and Soviet military operations overseas, where that could account for these older older men being fewer number. But then once you get to the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, you see a big spike initially, and then after that, all the age groups begin to decline. And there could be a little explanation for that, is that you had a lot of people leave Russia following the Cold War, looking for better economic opportunities in other parts of Europe and also in the United States and other parts of the world. And you had smaller populations being born. You also had, as a result of the end of the Cold War, the economy of Russia actually took off and became more prosperous. And as a result of that, you had people not needing or wanting as large of families as they once did. And so you see fewer and fewer people being born there as well. So these are some of the things I hope you can look for as you go through your population pyramids. Make sure you read the instructions in Google Classroom.